Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights with Experts. Today, we're happy to have joined with us today Jacob. Jacob got his start in tech and startups. He eventually moved on to wine, starting a winery, and he's now stayed in the industry, starting Vinsent, a wine e-commerce marketplace, and also Vinoventures, a wine investment firm. How are you today, Jacob?
Good. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And our guest student today, Hussein, studying PPE in the University of Exeter. How are you today?
All good. Thank you very much for having me.
So to kickstart the first question, Jacob, it would be, how did you get your start in the wine business? You were in tech and startups. How did you end up in the wine industry? Was it by accident or was it always a common interest?
So it wasn't by accident. It was a interest for a long time. I actually see a lot of commonality between tech startups and winemaking, which is you start off with pretty simple elements and you add skill and patience and luck. And you always need luck. And hopefully things work out and you have a great product and a great wine. And along the way, you got to do things to make sure both happen. And in the end, you have to tell people about it and sell it. If you create a great tech product and no one knows about it, you haven't really done much in the world. Same thing with a great bottle of wine. So I saw a lot of commonality and between those kind of paths. And I always was interested in wine. And finally, kind of the stars aligned to push me as an entrepreneur to start my own winery, which was which is called Jazreel Valley Winery. We just finished our ninth harvest. So we're pretty far into it, always learning. And, tech always remains part of whatever we do. Whatever you're doing today, especially during the past 7-8 months, tech remains part of what you do. So I don't think tech, you can leave it out of anything. And obviously I went back to, with Vincent, I went back to kind of helping other wineries with the same problems I faced, creating a tech-driven platform for wineries to sell direct to consumer.
Just to follow on with the jump you're talking about from startups to winery, although you mentioned there are many similarities, there will surely be some differences too. So the second question would be, how do students then adapt to differences and how do they make the jump between industries or jobs?
Yeah, the biggest jump for me after 15 years of software startups was the physicality of the wine industry. And that was the biggest stumbling block and kind of new thing for me, and particularly around issues of scalability. So I'll give you the clearest example. If you create a great app and it goes viral, so millions or tens of millions or sometimes hundreds of millions of people can get access to it literally within days, right? And all you need to do is keep adding to your AWS account. And you can have more and more server space or whatever hosting you're using. But as long as you have computing power, you can scale almost infinitely. Whereas in a very physical product like wine, if you have a viral hit, you sell out and it takes you 2 years to make more of it. So going viral in wine, one, you don't want to get a virus in the vineyard, but two, going viral, it's a very different thought process, very, very different thinking. And that's what keeps, certain industries still very much playing according to different rules, and wine being one of them. And then finally, the biggest issue is logistics, right? So if I create a great software product, then you basically, anybody who has internet access can unless, somebody's trying to throttle their connectivity, can get access to it. Whereas with a physical bottle of wine, there's tremendous amount of regulatory issues, but also just simply getting that bottle from one place to another.
What were some of the biggest challenges in setting up Jezreel, be it logistics, starting up, getting to know the industry, and how do you overcome these? Are there specific characteristics you think you have that helped with overcoming these challenges?
I mean, I think that whenever you get into a new, industry, even though you may think you know a lot about it from the outside, until you're doing it from the inside, you have no idea, right? And in every startup, we talk about the, the huge difference between whatever, Excel or Google Sheet you created, and then reality. And reality is always very different. So that's with any new venture. I think when getting into the physical setup of a winery, there are things you do which are very difficult to then pull back from, whether it be the vineyards themselves, whether it be the equipment that you buy or how you set it up and so on, where once you do them, it's very difficult to dial back. So you have to do a tremendous amount of homework. And then also in terms of what type of wine you're making, again, because if you're trying to make really good wine, or great wine, excellent wine, then the process is quite long. So from harvest till when I put a bottle in someone's hands, it could be 2.5 years. And that's just from when you harvest. So the homework needed beforehand is so much more than, when we say, oh, I've got a great idea, let's start coding this great idea. If it doesn't work, next week we'll do something else. In something like winemaking, you have to have really long-term strategic thinking. And that was really, I think, one of the most challenging things, and to learn, since I hadn't really done it before, in setting up the winery. And then secondly is, sales and marketing of wine is a world unto itself, literally a world unto itself. And with a tradition, with a history, with an etiquette, some of it very geocultured, and then all the players in the ecosystem and the supply chain. And if you don't understand all of it on the business side, you'll be a disaster. So it was, again, a real learning curve. I think now I'm always learning, but now I've gotten a good handle, at least on a bunch of markets. But it was definitely a steep learning curve in the beginning.
I just wanted to touch a bit on the wines itself. As someone with an interest in wine and based on your experience, what do you think are some of the key characteristics of wine that our audience should look out for, and how do they tell a good wine from a not so good one, I guess?
Well, look, I always say, a good wine is a wine you enjoy, right? So I think, first of all, people who have any interest in wine should just explore. That's number one. They really need to explore, both in terms of regions and types of grapes, which we usually call varietals. Some people will say varieties, I say varietals. And then blend and kind of just explore, right? And that's the best thing somebody can do. After they kind of explore and they start to kind of figure out what do they really like, I think they should always remain open to new things, but then I think they really need to then start looking kind of one level down and start understanding in terms of producers and wineries. And it gets very confusing today because there are a lot of, particularly on the internet, there are a lot of things which I think are almost consumer fraud, where you have a lot of folks who are bottling bulk wine and then creating fake stories around the wine. And then you go Google, what it says on the label, and you realize there is no Hawthorne Vineyards. It doesn't exist. You will not find it. And many examples like that. And there's a tremendous amount of that out there. Now, again, if you're looking for just, something which is passably drinkable, to put out at a party or something, those might be good options. But if you're really looking to, develop a taste for, and connect with what a winemaker is really trying to express, in their wine, you really need to put in the work to familiarize yourself. And the people are often intimidated, both in terms of the price and sort of the how should we say it, snobbery around the wine world. But I think in terms of price, you can find a lot of, particularly online, you can find a lot of really good wineries out there who just are not the top whatever in their market, who are much more affordable. So even from Saint-Emilion in Bordeaux, or even from Tuscany or other really interesting areas, you can find really great wines for between $20 and $30 a bottle in most markets. If you go below $20 a bottle, and this is just kind of a very broad statement, you need to start to kind of be careful. Below $10 a bottle, I would cook with it, but probably not try to educate yourself based on those wines. And when people sometimes ask about price, I give them this comparison, particularly friends who come from places where there are a lot of Starbucks, and there are a lot of places in the world with a lot of Starbucks. So people say to me, "Oh, well, $25, that's expensive for a bottle of wine." And I say, "Oh, really? Were you at Starbucks today?" And 9 times out of 10, pre-COVID, the answer would be, "Oh yeah, I was at Starbucks today." And I said, "Okay, and you got your double whatever, blah blah blah, with this and that. Maybe you got a croissant on the side." And they're like, "Yeah, I did." And I said, "Okay, and did you go back to Starbucks one more time today? During lunch?" And like, chances are, "Yeah, I did." I said, "Okay, so we've established that today you probably spent $15 on water and a tiny amount of coffee, a very small amount of coffee, which probably cost Starbucks, 50 cents. And it took them all of, 2 minutes to make it for you. And you were okay with that. And here I'm giving you for $25 a bottle of wine that somebody worked on for 2 years and had a vineyard, that they've been developing maybe for decades. And that bottle of wine will, provide for you and probably 3 other people, at a meal. What's the comparison, right? So I think sometimes people need to, when they're getting into wine, they need to kind of loosen up and not compare to other things, or compare it in a real way. And I think the best way that people can do that is together with friends, because if you buy a bottle of wine, together with a friend and drink it together, then you can talk about it together and so on. I think that is the best way to do it. And wine was meant to be a social drink, and it is all over the world.
Yeah, totally agree. Just before I hand the time over, I wanted to get your insight of what you think of the Israel wine industry. It's quite nascent compared to bigger names, Australia, California, France, and of course, as a boutique winery yourself on your 9th harvest. What do you think of the Israeli industry and of the boutique wineries?
Yeah, so it's fascinating because 2,000 years ago, Israel was a powerhouse in the wine industry. In fact, I just read an article about wineries along the Gaza coast, and they found clay bottles, essentially, but that's how they used to ship wine back then. And they found them in Britain. They found them in the UK. In other words, the wine was being exported from here all over the world. And in fact, when the Roman Empire took over roughly 2,000 years ago, the first thing they did was to control the wine industry and ship wine out throughout the Roman Empire. So what happened? I mean, 2 things happened. One, after the Romans conquered sort of the whole society sort of fell apart. 2, when Prophet Muhammad came along 600 years later, he was inspired to say, hey, either he was inspired or his students were to say you shouldn't drink alcohol, and then during the Ottoman era, winemaking kind of fell out of favor. So you didn't have winemaking in a serious way for almost 2,000 years. It restarted almost 100 years ago, but sadly, the first wave of the Israeli wine industry basically made a lot of really bad wine. And there's a whole bunch of reasons as to why that happened. The main reason is the people that were trying to make the wine had no education and no background in winemaking. So they rushed to plant a lot of vineyards and to restart the wine industry, but they were mainly making really bad wine. And then if you flash forward till about 30, 40 years ago, there was the beginnings of, hey, we can make high quality wine here as well. And starting to do that. And especially as Israelis traveled abroad and became educated abroad and then came back here, there was the beginnings of an Israeli boutique wine industry and a high-end wine industry. The same thing was happening at the same time in places like New Zealand and Australia. You mentioned Australia. I think New Zealand is even a more interesting example. And if you look at the New Zealand wine industry, last year, New Zealand exported over $1 billion US worth of wine. And if you walk into any wine shop in the world, practically, you'll find New Zealand wine. And it's a tiny country with a tiny population, smaller than Israel. You know, how is it that that happened? In the same time span, right? If you look back 35 years, in the same time span, it's because the New Zealand government and industry cooperated and promoted and invested in creating the New Zealand wine industry and creating an identity for the New Zealand wine industry. So we have people all over the world know about, Kiwi Sauvignon Blanc and you can look to a different degree at the Australian wine industry, which is more a bulk wine industry, but still important, and obviously California. So if you look at those same time spans, massive industries were created, California, New Zealand, Australia, where Israel remains quite small. Israel last year, just as an example, exported about $50 million US of wine. So, going forward, I think the Israeli wine industry really has to develop a unique identity, number one. And number two, needs to really come together with the government, which is always challenging in Israel to get the government to focus, but with the government to really promote wines of Israel and an identity for wines of Israel. I believe, and a lot of people agree with me, that identity needs to be focused on our Mediterranean culture and connection to the region, which is happening slowly but surely, and it's the type of wine we make. So we don't make, we're not trying to copy the classic Bordeaux blends. We're using sun-loving varietals for the audience that knows wine. We're using things like Syrah, Carignan, varietal, which is only grown here, called Argaman. And we're also playing around with real local varietals that grow wild here, like Debuki and a few others. So I think if the Israeli wine industry can do that, the brand Israel is quite strong in the world. So if you market it correctly, in 5 to 10 years, we could be the size of the New Zealand wine industry.
It's time for our guest student to start their questions.
Hello, sorry. Thanks again for coming in and talking to us about everything. First question, actually. What would you say to someone who's completely inept with wine like me? Because I remember even going for my first date with a girl and then pouring the wine in the cup, and I was just like, all right, cool. Didn't even taste it. I'm that bad. How can I get started,
First of all, you can look it up. There's a hilarious skit, little bit that was put together called Second Cheapest Bottle of Wine. Just look it up, it's on YouTube somewhere. Second cheapest bottle of wine. And because what happens, we all do the same thing, whether on a date or going to bring a present to somebody's dinner party that we're going to. And we don't want to bring the cheapest bottle of wine. So we ask for the second cheapest bottle of wine, but we don't say it, right? But on the wine menu, we look for what's the cheapest, and then we pick the one above. But if we would actually just say that, to the sommelier or to the person in the shop and just walk in and say, give me your second cheapest bottle of wine, and then when you brought it to the party, they would say, oh, thank you for bringing the second cheapest bottle of wine. So I think, as I was saying before, there are things that we always taste for the first time. And that's out of whatever we grew up with in our house or in our childhood, which some people take that step and some people never take that step, right? Some people eat the same food from when they're 2 years old to when they're 90 years old. But I think life is much more interesting if we take a little step outside of our comfort zone and try to experience things. But again, I think if you try to experience things, if you whether it's food or music or whatever, if you're choosing, something towards the bottom of the quality range and then making your decision based on that, that's a mistake. So I think you need to do a little bit of homework and say, okay, I want to experience, it's like microbreweries, right? So a general statement about microbreweries, right? You have to taste beer. You have to taste the beer to see if you like it. And there's hundreds and thousands of different taste profiles in microbreweries. So if all you ever drank was Miller beer, just to compare it to beer, or Michelob, and then you say, well, that's what I drink or whatever, and I would say, here, try this really incredible microbrew from whatever. It's going to be a big jump for you. So I think, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, it's not that you're inept at it, you just never experienced it. So it's like a food for the first time or anything else for the first time. I think you need to just immerse yourself in it and allow yourself to kind of go with the flow.
Thanks so much. And I was really interested, having read into your profile and everything and having gone through everything, studying PPE myself, so philosophy, politics, and economics. I like things which involve many different components. However, you went from tech and stuff into wine, and that must have been such a huge field to go into, where there's like the politics of wine, where governments getting involved, as you mentioned before. There's philosophy of wine. There's economics, obviously, as you're entering a market. How hard was it entering an industry which you hadn't gone into before?
Well, actually, can you guys hear me okay? I saw my connection was a little unstable. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, all good on mind.
Yes? No?
Yep, all good on mind.
Okay. Okay, great. So interestingly enough, if you look further back in my background, even though it's tech, a lot of the tech that I was involved in also touched on regulatory issues and political issues. And tech often does, even though we don't necessarily think about it in that way. So for example, one of the areas that I was quite involved in was voice over IP, basically, which paved the way for us to be doing something like this. And a good friend of mine named Jeff Pulver created something called the Pulver Order in the United States, in the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, which without the Pulver Order, these services would not be viable. So Jeff always kind of walks around and asks people, do you use Facebook Messenger? Do you use WhatsApp? Do you use Zoom? Do you use this? And people say yes, and he says, you're welcome, because without that, none of this would be possible. And when we started the voice over IP company that I helped co-found, which is called Delta 3, which I helped lead for about four or 5 years, people would say to us all the time, oh, well, you can't do that. And we would say, no, you can. Technically, you can. There may be a regulatory problem in country A or country B, but you can do it. And very similarly, if you've ever gone to China, right, the first thing people say to you before you go to China is, oh, preload your VPN onto your smartphone before you go so you can have access to all these services. And you say to yourself, wait, could the Chinese government be that stupid that all you have to do is put a VPN on your phone and then it works? No, they're not stupid. They're some of the smartest people in the world. They know that you're doing that. There's, it's a kind of cat and mouse game between politics, economics, and technology that's going on. And so, it reminds me of a regulator in Israel, who officially voice over IP was illegal in Israel. And I went to him to lobby him. He was the Director General of the Ministry of Communications. And it's not like Israel was such a big market, but we were based here, and it was kind of silly that it was illegal here and we were operating in many other countries. And I went to him and I said, you know, can't we just make progress here? Can't we move forward? And he was kind of from the old guard. And he said, look, I know everybody's doing it, but just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean that I have to say that it's okay. So, and I think that interplay, look, if you look, for example, at Facebook today, or at Google today, Google just got hit right with the antitrust lawsuit in the States. Facebook, obviously, every day is being criticized or, you know, being examined for content issues and so on and so forth. And, you know, for a while, Mark Zuckerberg tried to say, you know, I'm a tech company, but that's like a newspaper company saying it's a paper company, you know, that it's a paper company. I mean, no, you're an information company. You know, you have some responsibility. So I think the interplay between politics, economics, and tech is always there. Sometimes we're just more aware of it than in other ways. And I think when I brought over to the wine industry, I brought over into the wine industry that thinking, which was a little foreign to some of the folks in the wine industry who were still trading wine with little pieces of paper, and, you know, fax was like a big deal for them. And one of the simple things that I said was, from a regulatory point of view, you know, if I buy wine at a chateau in Bordeaux, and then I carry that wine with me back to my house in New Jersey, I don't have to go through all the regulatory, you know, all the regulatory levels that exist, which add a lot of cost to wine. So I said, but if I'm doing that, and that's okay according to US law and New Jersey state law, I can do that. Why can't I do that online and virtually put put somebody at the door of the winery in Bordeaux and create the same experience, but they don't have to be there physically? And I took that thinking to some of the best alcohol and beverage regulatory attorneys in the States and said, you know, what about if I do this? And they said, yeah, that would work. Yeah, that you know, if you're creating passage of title over there in France, and now all you're doing is shipping somebody their own wine to their house in New Jersey, they've already bought the wine, then yeah, they can go around the whole regulatory rigmarole, which, by the way, adds in the supply chain till you get to a store, you know, in New Jersey, sometimes adds 3 times to the cost of the wine. Meaning, if you were able to find that wine in France, same wine in the store in New Jersey could be 2 to 3 times the price.
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize I was muted for a second there. Still not used to the whole Zoom, you know, turning off and turning on. Yeah. But you mentioned, like, you've dipped your toes into many different fields, like from VoIP to wine and all over the place, really. You're one of a kind, jack of all trades. But I was curious, do you have a favorite field? And if so, this is going to be a bit of a weird question, but do you feel more fulfilled pursuing a field or a goal which brings in a lot of capital, or one which is more focused on a hobby/interest of yours?
I think passion for most entrepreneurs has to be there, right? There are people who are simply just excited by money. And I know, you know, plenty of folks like that. And they also enjoy entrepreneurship. If you don't enjoy startup life and entrepreneurship, so forget about it. Don't do it. If you want to make a lot of money and you're young enough, definitely pursue investment banking and go work for Goldman Sachs. You'll make a lot more money and it'll be a lot easier, I promise you. So you have to enjoy startup life. That's number one. Once you enjoy startup life, or you think you enjoy startup life, then it's a question of what to focus on. And I think if you focus on something that you enjoy from a passion point of view, then it's much more interesting. So, you know, I you know, have consulted to and mentored people who are in lots of industries that I myself could not get excited about, but they are. And I can't tell somebody else, what to be excited about. So they should be excited what they're excited about. So I think passion has to be there, because it's such a challenging life to be an entrepreneur, and to be involved in a very early stage startup is so challenging and so full of risk and tension and so on, that you really need to enjoy the space you're in. And that I recommend kind of to anybody. And yeah, I'm interested in lots of different spaces, and I could pursue, something in many of them. One of the other things is you got to really go deep when you're an entrepreneur in something. You really kind of you need to really go deep into that area. You need to know a lot about it. And if you don't know a lot about it, then you're probably not gonna succeed. So I think if the passion's not there, it's going to be even more challenging for you to really immerse yourself into whatever the specific vertical is. If you, what's his name? Michael Porter, the professor at Harvard Business School, once said something, I forgot, it must be in some book of his, or I heard him say it, I don't remember. But he said, if you've never had a car, it's very difficult to sell car insurance. So, I think if you have no connection to the vertical you're trying to disrupt, or you're trying to bring positive change to, then you're probably not going to succeed. And in the word, disrupt is a big word. And people often, I'll say one more thing, which helps me get up in the morning and do what I do, which is people often are taught in business school or in VC training school to ask, what's the pain point that you're trying to solve in some business? And I always say, there's no pain. People are going to their jobs, and it's not like they have, tremendous pain every day. They're going to their jobs and doing their jobs. I prefer to say, how can we bring more joy and delight into whatever it is that people are doing, or from a consumer point of view, how do I bring more joy and delight? Whether that be to their, video game experience, or their communication experience, or the wine that they want to drink. But, how do I bring, more joy and delight? Because people don't necessarily walk around saying, oh, I'm in pain, or I have a lot of pain, or whatever. So I think if you feel that that's part of your mission, and a positive side of your mission, then it helps prevent you from burnout. It helps keep you going. And I think if you feel that after you've achieved whatever you're trying to achieve in your particular venture, that there's a positive, right, at the end, then everybody benefits. If all you're trying to do is, again, make money, there's plenty of other ways to do that.
So basically, as you mentioned before, the money grabbers go for investment banking, Goldman Sachs. Sadly, I'm one of them. I've applied and stuff like that. So if you happen to know anyone in the industry, or if you have any jobs going, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, let me know. But the question I had was, when was it that you reached the point, I can actually truly go far in this field? I see the pathway, because you went into quite a difficult thing, like entrepreneurship. You didn't really settle for the whole sort of worker bee mentality. So was there a particular moment when you were like, crap, I've actually got this sort of thing?
Yeah, first of all, I think some people are born with it. Let's just put it that way. And that could go in two directions, right? It could be a good direction where you leverage that and you say, I'm going to create things, I'm going to start things, and so on. Or you could say, oh my God, I'm not employable, I'll never get a job, and my life is miserable. So people have often said that about me, and I think you can say that about many entrepreneurs, that they're not very employable. Somebody once said to me, a smart smart person who I really respect. I went to consult with him a number of years ago because McKinsey, the consulting firm, had recruited me. I was between startups, had recruited me to work on a project that they had thought about, which was quite a fascinating project, which was create a sort of a bridge between McKinsey itself and the early stage ecosystem globally. And I was fascinated by the challenge, and McKinsey, I'd always knew about it from the outside, so I started doing it, and got very quickly frustrated, right, very quickly, very different culture than I was used to. And to this smart person that I went to talk to about it, he said, Jacob, let me explain something to you. He said, first of all, you're not employable, right? In terms of who you are, you're not a person who can get a job. Two, you're not a person who can easily adapt yourself to the culture of, some bigger corporate culture. So you're going to try to adapt the corporate culture to you, but you can't do that, whether it be McKinsey or some other large corporation, right? You're not going to move that ship, by yourself, nor should you try. So it's just not a good combination. And I think the DNA of somebody, who is an entrepreneur is somebody who realizes that, they want to create identity, they want to create something, whereas a lot of folks, and this is not a judgment at all, right? This is just people's temperament. A lot of folks are like, no, I'd much rather join a team and become part of that team. And I think, by the way, for me, also, I've never really been kind of one of those people who gets very into rooting for one team or another that I don't, like, it's not part of my interests. So, whereas I think if I was playing on a team, I mean, I have played on teams, and they're like, yeah, I'm part of a team, but I'm not going to root some team that I. So I think it's a temperament thing, and I didn't want to say, but I want to correct something about I'm not saying money grabbers. I'm just saying I'm not at all saying that. I'm saying
I just meant I'm a money grabber. Don't worry.
But I'm saying if part of what somebody wants to do is, from a strategic point of view, plot a career path that will allow them to, make a nice living along the way. And as they progress in that space, they could become actually quite wealthy by anybody's standards. There are, I would say, choose anything besides entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is not a career; it's a passion. And once you realize, I heard this once, these statistics from a guy named Chris, I think he pronounces it, Y-E-H, if you look it up. Very smart guy, he does a lot of writing. Anyway, he's in Silicon Valley, and I met him a couple times in person. But it was from him that I heard these statistics, and it really kind of, even though I was already an entrepreneur, it opened my eyes even more. He said, we always talk about 9 out of 10 new businesses failing, which is a scary statistic, right? 90%, which, if you're an entrepreneur, means, take 10 of you in a room, 9 of you are going to fail. But he said the statistics are actually much worse than that. That's 90% of new businesses that actually get off the ground, right, and start. He said, how many people are there where it's, 3 people sitting around and they're spending a lot of time talking about something and they never get past that stage? Or the 3 people who come up with an idea, or 2 people or whatever come up with an idea, they have a deck and they start to go out to try and raise money for it, and they never successfully raise any money, and they can't afford to work on it without raising any money, and so on and so forth. So he said, if you actually amplify the statistics to include all of those people who are trying, right, it's really like 1% that succeed. So, when facing something like that, you have to really enjoy the journey or you really shouldn't be doing it at all.
You touched on whilst talking, you're talking about like going from McKinsey, which is like so one of the other places I've applied for. That I don't know, like they're crazy. I don't know how you do all that stuff. They make you download a video game as part of their testing now. It's insane. But you went from those sorts of environments and the tech sort of environment where you're creating things online and creating applications or whatnot, and you've created something physical now where you can hold it in your hands. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that feeling you might have had when you first had that bottle of wine in your hand, the first one you created, or something along those lines.
Yeah. It was interesting. But I'll say before the wine story, I was involved with a company as an investor and an active board member many years ago, as a continuation of my involvement in the voice over IP industry that was trying to bring voice over IP to the corporate sector. And because there weren't physical devices yet, the company actually literally created the world's first kind of VoIP, desktop, corporate phone. And I was 1,000% against that direction. And the CEO, wanted to do it, and he spent crazy amounts of money that we had raised. I was a seed investor, but he has crazy amounts of money creating this physical device. And he was all excited about this physical phone. And it actually went on to go into the Smithsonian Museum as the first desktop voice over IP phone. So he was all very proud of that. Sadly, the company went bankrupt. Because one of the reasons is because we were premature, but another reason is because we were doing something which was way out of our wheelhouse, right? We had no business doing this. We were really a software company, and we had no business trying to create a hardware product. And I think, when you get involved with a physical product, you have to ask yourself, which part of this physical product am I going to be innovating, right? And am I going to be, so if we go to wine right now, how innovative can I be? Can I innovate everything, right? Or should I focus on what the part that's most interesting and that's most innovative, really, and that's most expressing? So, you can't, as kind of a startup person or as an entrepreneur or whatever, we're always looking at everything going, oh, wait, can't we do this better? Or can I do that better? Or why are they using this? Or why are they using that? And you have to push those feelings down, kind of temper them down, and really focus in on, okay, what is it that I'm bringing that's new? And so, for example, with a bottle of wine, you have to think about where there's the bottle itself, right? So which bottle do I go with, right? There's a bunch of different types of bottles. It's going to be glass, probably. Again, not because any technical reason, or not because glass is the best for wine or whatever. It's just because that's what people use. So again, don't be different if you don't have to be different. And then you have to start thinking about, what about my label? What's my label going to look like? And blah, blah, blah. There's going to be certain things where you're required on the back label in certain markets, you're required to do. And then there's, okay, when people see this front label and it's sitting on a shelf, how are they going to react to that before they even get to taste the wine? So there are a lot of things that have to go through and you have to think about before getting to what you really are innovating about, which is the wine itself. That's the true product, is the wine. Everything else is literally just a way to get it to your glass. And even the glass is a question. What kind of glass are you going to be using? I get hives break out when I see people pouring our wine into throw a disposable plastic cup. It drives me crazy, absolutely crazy. Sometimes I'll rush over and stop them from doing it. Just for so many different reasons, it drives me crazy. But the feeling when you have that, going back to the core of your question, the feeling when you have that after all of that work and you've got that, bottle of wine, for me, it's apprehension, nervousness, because everything's built up to that moment, but that's not the moment. In other words, you think that's the moment, right? The bottle of wine is in your hand. Wow, look, here it is, right? But that's not the moment. The moment is, when Jonathan or when Bob or when Sue pours it into their glass, drinks it, and says, wow, that's a great wine. Now, that's the true moment. But you did all those other things to get to that true moment, and that true moment would not be possible without all those other things. So having that bottle of wine, which is all ready to put on the shelf, is one more stage kind of along the way. And another old hand in the wine industry who I respect a lot, he said, when have you succeeded as a vintner, as a winemaker, when have you succeeded? And I didn't know what the answer was. And he said, do you think it's when you've sold a bottle of wine? I said, yeah, that would be a good sign of first success, when you've sold a bottle of wine. He said, no, anybody could sell a bottle of wine the first time because nobody's tasted it yet, right? So, anybody can convince somebody to buy that first bottle of wine. He said, you've started to succeed, he said, when somebody pours it into their glass, just what I explained, when somebody pours it into their glass and drinks the whole bottle of wine, right? That's important. Not alone, but with a few other people, drink the whole bottle of wine, which means they didn't pour a glass and then put it in the refrigerator and forget about it. They drank the bottle of wine and really liked it. He said, how do you know when you are really succeeding? I said, I don't know. He said, when they go back and get a second bottle of that wine, that's when you know that you've succeeded. And that goes to, that question of, when is it that you're at your most, emotional in the sense of okay, I've done it. And for me, it's particularly then. It's when somebody sends me, a picture of the second or the third or the fourth, bottle of wine, and with some emoji or writing something or telling me how much they loved it. That's what's exciting for me.
Do you mind if I ask one last question? I promise it's the last one, but yeah, I was gonna ask you lots of weird ones like, oh, what do you think of my lockdown fuzz? The beard, terrible, I know. And I was gonna ask you oh yeah, can I email you after? But I think the people want to know in this world of turmoil right now with COVID and stuff going on, and the job markets being as they are, with for example, JP Morgan moving a lot of industries to Germany, Sainsbury's cutting down Argos, yada yada yada. I'm sure there are a lot of students who want to go into entrepreneurship or go into your sorts of fields that you've been in the past. I was wondering, do you have any, one key piece of advice? I know this is really standard, boring question, but do you have any form of key advice or any hard truths that students should know?
You're actually stealing the thunder. Our last
question.
Was
that yours? Oh, I take that back. I take it back. Go to you.
No, the last question we literally ask every single one is that if you had a piece of advice to offer to the youth, what would that one piece of advice be?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's in my room. It's on the shelf in my room. Sorry, that was my son asking a question. The key piece of advice is, and I think important, particularly during COVID, right? We will get past this, right? If you look back, whether it be in just in, well, I would say I'm dating myself now, but but if you look back, right, just in the sort of when I've been out there when I haven't been a student anymore, right? We're always students of life, but when I wasn't officially a student anymore, we had several market crashes, right? If you look, whether it be 1997, whether it be the dot-com implosion in 2000 to 2001, we had 2008, obviously, right? None of those were predictable, but all of them were predictable, right? In other words, we didn't know exactly when or how or why or whatever, but we know that we will face really cataclysmic, whether financial or health or what have you things. And as entrepreneurs, you need to have a sense, and not only entrepreneurs, I would say for everybody, but it's an entrepreneurial way of thinking. Let me put it that way. That we will get through this. Now, that doesn't mean that we just sit back, right? It means you got to be active and so on. But many people have pointed to the fact that some of the greatest innovative companies have been created specifically at kind of the lowest, what people felt were the lowest points of whatever the industry might be. And you can look back to whether it's in the dot-com implosion or from the financial point of view, because sometimes it's at those moments that we say, hey, maybe we could be doing something a little bit different. And I think what COVID is showing all of us is, and we don't know how much this will affect, and we don't know what going back to normal will mean. Nobody knows what any of that means. But we do know that it definitely has shed a new way of thinking, just exactly as we're doing now, of saying, hey, maybe if I ask somebody to do this, on video conference, and given where the technology is today, it's no big deal, and we can do it. So I'll give you one little tiny example. I've done a number of sessions with sommeliers around the world where we combine technology and physicality, where we ship the wine to them in advance, and then they do a guided virtual tasting for 25 somms at the same time, usually on Zoom, but not only, for 25 somms at the same time. And for them, it's a way of community, right? A lot of them have been sitting at home. So they're happy to come together because they see their fellow sommeliers. They get to experience a new wine and talk to a winemaker. Whereas pre-COVID, had I asked them to participate in something like that, it would have been like, what are you talking about? You want me to taste your wines? Come fly to Denver or fly to LA or fly to London or Hong Kong and I'll taste your wines. Whereas today I can say to them, hey, I'm going to ship you the wine in advance. You're going to have it, to drink along with me, but I'm going to be sitting here in the north of Israel and we're going to drink the wine together. So I think those types of experiences may continue. I hope they do, because it would make life easier for everybody. Does that replace, in person? Definitely not. I very much believe that in person is still the highest level of connectivity, but it definitely opens the door. So I think the kind of key piece of advice is that we will get past this, but it is specifically now that we need to be thinking about when we get past this. First of all, how do we get past this and so on, but when we get past this, how do I see myself? How do I see my industry, or the industry that I want to be in? How do I see it post whatever it will be? Because the people that can imagine that, and again, 99% of them will imagine it not correctly, but the people who can imagine it and activate and do something about it are the people that will succeed in helping us create new, interesting ways of doing whatever it is that we want to do.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Insights with Experts. We'd now like to introduce a platform that we think would be useful for all of our viewers. Teachers on Wheels is an Australian charity that helps people from all walks of life achieve their career goals. They provide free career guidance and support services to young people in Australia and all over the world, including weekly career webinars with professionals from a diverse range of industries, a resume review service, and a mentoring program in collaboration with Westpac.
Thanks for listening in. This podcast has been brought to you by Jazreel, a platform designed to bridge the gap between the youth and professionals. You can read more about us at jazreel.org. And you can also check out the section titled Insights with Experts, where you can submit your questions that you might have for future experts and industries that you would like to learn more about. And you can also refer in any experts that you might know yourself.